a bi-weekly global podcast on sustainable heating and cooling technologies brought to you by Shecco and supported by Techo. My name is Charlotte McLaughlin. I'll be hosting today's show from Brussels, Belgium. I'm the European multimedia reporter of Shecco's industry-leading websites r744.com, hydrocarbons21.com and ammonia21.com. And I'm joined today by my colleague in the United States, Michael Garry, editor of Accelerate America and North American editor for Shecco. So how are you today, Michael?
Very well, thank you. Good to be here.
So this week we have quite an interesting show for everybody. We'll be joined by an atmospheric scientist in the US from Texas called Yangyang Xu, and he wrote an important paper on short-lived climate pollutants and mitigating HFCs. The reason he's joining us this week is because last week was the International Day for Short-Lived Climate Pollutants, and also yesterday was the day of the ozone layer. So we're sort of trying to base this entire thing around these two very important issues. Also from Michael, he is going to talk to us about Accelerate America and the story from Mexico, who have installed their first CO2 transcritical installation. And then some really important stories from the US. Two states are going to join California in reducing HFCs. So it's pretty exciting news, and it definitely seems like the US, through local state initiatives, will start addressing HFCs. So Michael, to start off with Accelerate America, what were the big stories?
Thanks, Charlotte. Well, we just published the September issue of Accelerate America. I encourage everyone to read it at accelerate.na.com. The cover story is about Mexico's first transcritical store, which has been installed by the Cassoulet chain in Culiacan, Mexico, in the northwestern part of the country. And it's the very first time that a Mexican supermarket has installed transcritical CO2 systems. So that's very exciting news. The system was provided by Kaiser Warren, a U.S. company based in Georgia. The store that this system was installed in just opened in August, mid-August. And I interviewed the CEO of the company, Juan Manuel Lake Bestitas, and his colleagues told me that they'll be testing this system over the next year to see how it does in terms of energy performance and maintenance, etc., so that they can determine whether to go forward with more of these systems.
And why did they decide to install this? I mean, as far as I know, Mexico doesn't have any HFC legislation so far. I think they're even in have a slower phase down strategy under the Montreal Protocol's Garry Amendment. So I mean, why would they go so far ahead before any legislation or anything comes into effect?
Juan Manuel told me that Cassoulet is very concerned about the environment. It wants to do the right thing for its customers and its communities. So they're really motivated by an environmental mission, test climate-friendly technologies. So that's one reason. And they also, they've been observing what's going on around the world and in North America, in the U.S., Canada, in the supermarket business, and they, see the trend towards transcritical and other natural refrigerant technologies. So they decided to try it themselves in this new store to test it. So this system comes with an adiabatic condenser from Guttner. The adiabatic condenser allows the system to operate efficiently even in the hot climates in Mexico, and they do have very hot and humid climates year-round in this particular part of Mexico and most of Mexico. And but they believe that the adiabatic system will enable them to work in subcritical rather than transcritical mode, meaning that it'll be more efficient than if they didn't have that adiabatic system.
Yeah, definitely. And what are the other articles in this magazine as well?
A couple of other interesting supermarket-related articles. Weiss Markets is a major mid-Atlantic chain in the U.S., and they are testing their first transcritical refrigeration system at a store in Randolph, New Jersey. They are a member of the Green Chill program, and they've done a lot of work reducing their leak rates in their stores. And they've also introduced a new prototype involving secondary glycol for medium temperature cases. So they've done steps to reduce their leaks, to reduce their charge, and now they feel they're ready to try CO2. Another story we have on the supermarket side is Raley's is said that it's going to be installing its first natural refrigerant system, and it's an ammonia CO2 system. Ed Esberg, a former refrigeration executive there, who is now a consultant for Raley's, talked about this at the Atmosphere America show in June, but we have all the details on that in the current issue of Accelerate. So that's pretty interesting. We have companies trying transcritical. We have another company trying ammonia CO2, which of course is much less common in the United States. There are only 4 other supermarket companies that have tested that. As a sidebar to that story, Grocery Outlet is another chain based in California, is going to be testing propane self-contained systems. So we have all the different natural refrigerant options described in this month's issue, and want to mention that at the FMI Energy and Store Development Conference coming up on the 23rd of September, running through the 26th, we'll have print copies of this issue of Accelerate America distributed there. I will be attending, and I look forward to meeting people at the conference to talk about this stuff.
Okay, and we also had 2 really important stories from the US. I think everybody familiar with our podcast and certainly with the Accelerate magazines and our websites will know about California's short-lived climate pollutant strategy, which involves HFCs. But what's really encouraging about this is that 2 other states in the US have also decided to come up with their own HFC phase down plans. Is this following California, or is this something that they themselves have decided to do? Or is it a worry that the federal government may not actually do this in the end?
Yeah, actually, it's New York and Maryland announced plans this week to phase down HFCs in their states, and this really does follow what California is doing. So New York, on Monday, Governor Cuomo, who I should say just won his primary challenge yesterday in an election against the actress Cynthia Nixon. But Governor Cuomo on Monday announced that he was directing the state's Department of Environmental Conservation to issue regulations that will phase out the use of HFCs.
Oh, by the way, Michael, just to interrupt you, sorry. Is there a governor election going on in New York at the moment?
Right. Well, we just had the primary yesterday. Governor Cuomo prevailed over his challenger, and then of course in November there will be the election between the Democrat Cuomo and the Republicans for the governors.
But generally, New York is Democrat, right?
Cuomo's favored. Yes, he's favored. So anyway, the proposal will adopt the EPA's HFC regulations that were passed in 2015-16. Governor Cuomo was quoted as saying that, we are taking action to begin the phase out of hydrofluorocarbons, and I encourage other states to join New York and California to combat dangerous HFCs. And sure enough, the following day, the Maryland Department of Environment announced that it would be pursuing measures to phase out HFCs. So that was a surprising and welcome development.
Okay, so thanks very much, Michael, for your contribution today. Just moving on, we did an interview today with Yangyang Xu from the Texas A&M University, and we're essentially focused in this week's episode on 2 events that happened last week. Yesterday's Ozone Layer Day, and also the short-lived climate pollutant day, which happened last week as well. So we're just going to talk about, from the academia side, how much HFCs affect climate change and how they're sort of part of the general move to address climate change globally. So maybe you can give some background information on that?
Sure. Thanks for having me here. My name is Yangyang. I'm an atmospheric scientist by training. I studied climate change using complex global climate models that runs on supercomputers with thousands of processors. And I was in California as a graduate student, and I moved to Texas 2 years ago as an assistant professor in the Department of Atmospheric Sciences. My main research is on climate change problems as well as solutions, and I broadly survey various ways to mitigate climate change, and this includes the role of HFC and other short-lived climate pollutants because of their potent greenhouse gas effects and the potential for rapid mitigation. That's my main background.
And how much would you say that HFCs can prevent the global warming that we're seeing? Can you give like a degree figure of that?
Yes, we published on this intensively a few years ago, notably my 2013 paper in atmospheric chemistry and physics. The number we provided back then has a range because in science we not only provide the central value but also the uncertainty. But the central number is about half degree Celsius warming that can be limited because of transitioning into replacement for current HFC technology. Half degree Celsius may not sound like a big number, but remember the Paris Agreement now call for active regulation to limit global warming under 1.5 degree at the end of the century. Remember, we are now already at 1 degree warming compared to pre-industry. That means we only have half degree to go. That includes all contribution from carbon dioxide and everything. So half degree from HFC side is a big contribution if we want to achieve that 1.5 degree or 2 degree warming stabilization goal.
And that half a degree, is that by how much HFCs are planned to accelerate, basically, as more and more people switch from obviously ozone depleting substances to HFCs, and then also the rate of air conditioning increase as well? Are those numbers based on that?
Yes, the half degree number is a projection towards the end of the century, so it's not happening yet. It is account for 2 scenarios. One is business as usual scenario that we include. This is a collaboration with Gus Welders based in Netherlands, who is an expert in HFC economics and scenario development for the future. So based on his projection, we include not only the transitioning from current CFC and HCFC, both are ozone depletion substances, and therefore will have to be regulated under current Montreal Protocol, and the countries are working together to replace that. But the air conditioning needs are still there and growing in the future in light of population growth and air conditioning demand. So we convert those 2 numbers together, and that gives us a very rapid projection of future increase of HFC use towards the end of the century. It is projected to increase by 100 times roughly compared to present day use. So present day use, although small, the future projection is very large. So that's our business as usual scenario. And we also account for a mitigation scenario, meaning we actively to move towards the next generation of refrigerator, including HFC that has lower global warming effect or natural refrigerants, etc. That basically has no damage to environment, at least to our current understanding. So difference between those 2 scenarios is the potential contribution we can make by acting now. That's the half degree number.
And do you think that the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol goes enough to mitigating that 0.5 degrees?
The Kigali Amendment is definitely a first concrete step toward that goal. It is the first time that countries actually come together and sign a agreement that is binding, meaning they have to act on this. The problem with that is the timeline is relatively long, meaning developing countries such as India does not have to act on this until 10 years from now. And the transitioning after that may be slow, so there's no timeline attached to that. That's why people have been working to accelerate the process in the term of Kigali Plus, etc. I was working with Dr. Durwu Zelki, the founder of IGSD, Institute for Governance and Sustainable Development, working together for an assessment report for United Nations Environmental Program. And in that, we specifically want to assess the future use of HFC, again, as the baseline scenario, the worst case scenario if we don't do anything, plus several different scenarios in which we adopt the Kigali Amendment as it is now, or we accelerate the process to transition into cleaner refrigerant as soon as possible. So we're crunching numbers for that, and the report is likely to be released early next year.
Okay, and just also if we finally talk about generally short-lived climate pollutants, you also talked about a report about how they can also mitigate climate change and our efforts. And I think they're one thing we don't talk about so often. I think HFCs have been in the news quite a lot because of Kigali, but obviously, black carbon plays. So, I mean, how big of an effect reducing those would have on climate change? And are they something that you think people are discussing enough under the Paris Agreement?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, I broadly study climate change, the attribution, meaning the cause of climate change in the past and its future evolution and potential ways to mitigate climate change. HFC as part of the short-lived climate pollutant species is, of course, a major component to that and provide a potential opportunity to mitigate climate change. I also studied on black carbon, which is the soot emission from incomplete combustion of carbon materials such as biomass burning or indoor cook stoves. So those species are also potent global warming agent because it is black, so it absorbs solar radiation and heat the atmosphere. And also, when the black carbon is deposited over snow, mountain snowpack or sea ice, it will lower the reflectivity of snow, make it darker and therefore easier to melt. And that's an additional source of global warming. So we have computed the numbers and the global warming potential from black carbon as well as methane, and we calculate the projection for the future global warming. And we also look at the potential of mitigating those species. Remember, those are short-lived species, meaning if we act to limit their sources now, their atmosphere concentration, the presence in the atmosphere will go down fairly quickly in the matter of a few months to a few years. So that will translate into a larger difference in terms of climate cooling. And we also estimate the consequential impact on sea level rise. Sea level rise is a result of global warming, but it happens more slowly because of the inertia of ocean system. So if we can limit the global warming at a faster pace in the next 10 or 20 years, that in the end have a larger effect for sea level rise toward the end of the century. So we have published several papers on this, And the numbers are well cited as a way to motivate the action in short-lived climate pollution species. And there are several other research groups are also following and revising and refining the results. They generally start to converge, and we're limiting the uncertainty range of those numbers, meaning the scientific understanding is growing. So I guess the most important thing is how we put science into action and how to expedite the process. That's, I see the potential of academia working with policy makers, working with industry, working with news organizations like yours to raise awareness and also the awareness of general public so they can act bottom up, and also raise awareness for policymakers so they can start considering policy options that are useful to mitigate climate change.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Yangyang, and I encourage our listeners to definitely look into that research and what they themselves can do to mitigate short-lived climate pollutants. So, well, thanks very much for listening to the NatRefs show. We just have a quick word from our sponsor, Shecco's Managing Director, Andreas Meyer.
Hi, my name is Andreas Meyer. I'm Managing Director of Shecco. What is Shecco? Shecco is a rack manufacturer based in Germany, near Frankfurt area, and we are now over 36 years in the market, manufacturing racks. At the moment, the business is quite challenging because there's a lot of movement going into the direction of net refrigerants. So we are ready and prepared. We did our first CO2 transcritical rack in 2006, and nowadays it's getting more or less a commodity in Europe. But actually we are now here in Asia. So we just want to start up Asia. 2 years ago we founded a company in Singapore called Shecco Asia, and now since 2 months we started our production facility in Bangkok in Thailand to cover also the Asian market, because we believe in that Asia is an upcoming near future, very important for us as a rack builder. For net refrigerants, at the moment it's still Freon, but I think the change will be soon and will be fast.
Well, that's all we have time for today. Thanks for listening, and join us in 2 weeks' time for another great NatRefs show, where we'll be hearing about atmosphere Birica.